To remain updated with the latest business news, click on the bell icon.
Hello and welcome to this special broadcast of Tech Today. Now, as you all know, India Today is the only channel reporting from the war zone. But there's another battle that's taking place in the digital realm between Russia and Ukraine. And given the connected world we all live in, it has ramifications for all of us here in India, Asia, and the world over. Russia and Ukraine have been engaged in a fierce cyber battle for months. Power grids, government websites, crypto platforms, social media, banks and ATMs. The cyber threat is real. So today we will be speaking to the world's top experts to ask the question, is a full-scale cyber war coming, or is it already here? And what does it mean for the citizens of the world? I am your host Ayush Alavadi, and this is a Tech Today special. Now, while the Russian army continues its assault on Ukraine, Ukrainians have been hit by multiple cyber attacks as well. Cyber attacks targeted at ordinary civilians and Ukrainian state-owned digital assets with the use of complex Viper malware and ransomware. Attacks which can wipe out all your data and cripple networks altogether. Here's a special report.
President Putin is waging a hybrid war, and the latest escalation is in cyberspace with multiple cyber attacks. Cyber attacks targeting ordinary civilians and Ukrainian state-owned digital assets with the use of complex Viper malware and ransomware. As the Russian army continues to bombard Ukrainian cities, the Russia-linked Shuk group is targeting ordinary civilians by conducting cyber espionage attacks. Ukrainians are being targeted with complex and sophisticated phishing attacks, malware, and ransomware. Ukraine's Cyber Defense Force has issued a warning on social media with a widespread attempt to infect citizens with malicious software. Ukrainian authorities have also blamed Russian-allied Belarusian hackers for the attacks on its citizens. Ukraine's largest state-owned bank, private bank, and Sberbank have also been targeted with a new malware called Hermetic Viper. Numerous government ministries and financial service organizations have been hit by distributed denial of service attacks. Earlier, a series of DDoS cyber attacks have knocked out the websites of some ministries, major banks, and has also forced the Ukrainian army off the internet. In retaliation, Ukraine's State Service of Special Communications has launched an IT army of Ukraine to carry out cyber attacks on Russian targets. The ministry has said that as many as 400,000 hackers are now fighting online for Ukraine. Russia has also been hit by a spate of cyber attacks from the hackers collective Anonymous, which has declared cyber war on President Putin.
Mr. Putin, the ongoing invasion of Ukraine has shown that your regime has no respect for human rights or the self-determination of your neighbors.
Ukraine's cyber conflict with Russia is nothing new. Previously, in 2015 and 2016, hackers working under the orders of the Kremlin had caused power cuts to Ukrainian cities. Will this latest maneuver from President Putin's arsenal force Ukraine into submission, or will the siege of Kiev be a protracted affair? Only time shall tell.
Now, pettier, not pettier, ransomware, malware, all of this can sound a little complicated and it sounds like tech lingo. So just to break it down and to dissect and analyze what exactly is happening in this cyber war between Russia and Ukraine, we have one of the world's top cybersecurity experts joining us, Mikko Hypponen. Thanks so much for speaking to us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Mikko, but this has happened before, right? I mean, in the situation in Georgia and also a few years ago in Crimea, we saw these denial of service attacks. And of course, we've seen Viper now. This is also the region from where back in the days in the cybersecurity world, we spoke about pettier and not pettier. This is not a region which is any stranger to any of these sort of cyber threats.
That is correct. We've seen plenty of activity in all of the ex-Soviet states. Definitely from the organized crime gangs, but also from the governments. In fact, I would claim that Ukraine is one of the best countries in Europe in defending themselves against national or nation state sponsored cyber attacks, because they've been defending themselves against these attacks for basically 7 years now. However, what is something that we see for the very first time ever anywhere in the world, that there's an open conflict going on, and the leadership of a country is asking civilians, outsiders, hackers, and hacktivists to join the battle and to attack their targets. This is completely new.
We're living in 2022 in an age of crypto, the metaverse, AR, AI, machine learning, and stuff like that. And then we're talking about how systems can be crippled with DDoS attacks, how power grids can be stopped. We're talking about building smart cities around the world with EVs, how all of these infrastructure systems and supporting systems can actually be crippled with a piece of code. How exactly are the two nations battling it out when it comes to this sort of cyber modern warfare situation?
You are correct. We are making ourselves more vulnerable by using technology and connectivity everywhere. And I'm saying this as the father of the Hypponen law, which says that if it's smart, it's vulnerable. All the smart devices we're building, everything we're connecting to the internet, they bring us benefits, but they also make us more vulnerable. We are going towards a world where it's not only electricity grid, which we need everywhere, we also need the internet grid everywhere. And if it doesn't work, then our societies don't work. And a good example of how these attacks are done in practice, as you mentioned, are these denial of service or distributed denial of service attacks. And these are very simple attacks, but also very effective. It's basically a traffic jam on the internet. Any road, if it has too much cars, too much traffic, slows down and eventually traffic stops. When the jam clears out, there's no permanent damage, but while the attack or jam is underway, nothing works. This is what a denial of service attack is. It's generating too much traffic against a web server, an email server, anything that runs on the internet, and it will slow down. But when the attack stops, there's no permanent damage.
Mikko, we live in this incredibly connected, globalized world where 5G is the talk of the town now, and everyone's talking about that even at events nowadays. It's all about how 5G is going to change things, the Internet of Things and stuff like that. And when we're talking about a situation like this, and of course the increased usage of cryptocurrencies during this particular war and in the past few months here in India and around the world, you're sitting in Helsinki, I'm here in Mumbai. How immune are we to some of these, spillovers or ramifications from this sort of online war between Ukraine and Russia? I'm guessing none of us are really immune to this, wherever we are in this world.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict has already multiple times expanded itself beyond the borders of Ukraine. We've seen this already years ago. The most gripping example is the NotPetya attack of 2017, so 5 years ago, which was a Russian attack against Ukraine critical infrastructure and everyday businesses. And that was a worm which was targeting systems inside Ukraine, but it hit companies which were operating globally, including in Ukraine. And once this attack hit the internal networks of global enterprises, it didn't just destroy information physically in Ukraine, but everywhere within that enterprise. As an end result, multiple Western companies lost tens of thousands of workstations and servers. We know of multiple companies which reported losses of hundreds of millions of US dollars because they were hit with a Russian cyber weapon which was really targeting Ukraine. And now, during this conflict, the Hermetic Wiper attack, which started on the 23rd of March, we already have examples of that hitting Latvia and Lithuania, which are close by countries to Ukraine. So internet has no borders. It's all too easy for cyber weapons to spread to places which were not really the original target.
Mikko, thanks so much for sharing those insights with us here on this special broadcast. We really hope to continue to have these conversations with you in the coming days. And like you said, the only way that we can stay safe in this sort of digital world when it comes to conflict is to actually go live under a rock. Now on Tech Today, we are obsessed with technology and we want to ask all the questions when it comes to the tech world, and there seem to be a lot of questions and tech angles to this particular war as well. After the West imposed severe economic sanctions on Russia, big tech companies have now joined the fight against Russian aggression by imposing strict curbs on their respective platforms too. Google, Apple, Meta, Twitter have all banned Russian state-affiliated media Russia Today and Sputnik as well. Have a look at this special report.
Russia's aggression in Ukraine was met by swift, severe and crippling sanctions from the United States, the United Kingdom and the European Union. Now, big tech giants are joining the fight against Russian aggression by updating their terms to do business with the country. The world's 5 leading tech companies, Google, Apple, Meta, Twitter, and Amazon, are imposing significant sanctions on Russia. Social media giants Meta, Twitter, ByteDance, TikTok have come under immense pressure to curb the spread of misinformation. Meta has removed access to Russia Today and Sputnik on both Facebook and Instagram. It has also removed the option for state media to monetize content on any of its platforms, forcing the Kremlin to ban the social media giant. Tech giant Google has limited the use of Google Pay in Russia for customers using a sanctioned bank. It has also stopped selling online advertising in Russia, besides banning Russia Today and Sputnik in Europe. Apple has suspended all product sales in Russia and has limited Apple Pay and other services. It has also blocked Russia Today and Sputnik from Apple Store. Twitter has restricted some users from Russia. Twitter is also complying with European Union sanctions on Russia's state-affiliated media, Russia Today and Sputnik. YouTube has banned the Russian state media outlet Russia Today and other Russian channels from receiving advertisements. It is said that videos from Russian creators will come up less often in its recommendations. Other tech companies taking a stern stance on Russia are Netflix and Amazon. Netflix has temporarily stopped future projects and acquisitions in Russia. While tech companies are working together to introduce measures to curb Russian expansionism, the war has also brought focus on cryptocurrencies. The Ukrainian government has appealed on Twitter for cryptocurrency donations. Ukraine's Vice Prime Minister recently tweeted the wallet address for donations. He also urged crypto exchanges to block the addresses of Russian users. In Kyiv, cryptocurrencies are helping fund Ukraine's resistance against the Russian invasion. But Russia may use them to mitigate the impact of crippling economic sanctions imposed by the West.
As long as the shop owner or their son or their daughter has the capability to take in cryptocurrency payments, but the breadth of crypto adoption in Ukraine is really an important factor here.
While the overwhelming impact of the sanctions imposed by big tech companies on Russia will only be evident in the coming months, cryptocurrencies will provide an alternative to both Ukraine and Russia.
So clearly there's several technology angles in this war between Ukraine and Russia, and there's a global angle as well. Just to understand this a little better, I'm now joined by Natalia Kostuk from the Georgia Institute of Technology. She's a researcher and someone who's been studying this space for nearly a decade now, specifically Russian operations, cyber operations in Ukraine. Nadia, thanks so much for joining us on this special broadcast.
Thank you for having me.
Nadia, when we really zoom in on this situation, Ukraine's cybersecurity authority has actually come out and said that they're fighting the world's first hybrid war. Now, if we just try to analyze the nature and scale of what's happening in the region, and that's a place that you're no stranger to. You're from Ukraine and now you're in the US, and you've been studying this space and Russia's actions over there. Would you agree that this is the world's first hybrid war?
So I think over the last few decades, how wars have been fought have been affected by the modern technology. And cyber technology is one of these modern technologies. So since the start of the conflict in Ukraine in 2014, we've seen an extensive use of cyber operations. Unfortunately, they haven't been as effective So as a result, now we see that Russia has to use military operations to achieve a strategic advantage. Despite that, we've seen still and some substantial use of cyber operations. But I would stress the most important aspect so far, if we think about the digital space, is the disinformation and influence operations that Russia has been launching for some time.
Nadia, since you've been studying this space for a while, I think this happened back during the incursions in Georgia and then, of course, in Crimea as well. Has the Russian operation evolved over the years? Now, we're talking about a world where there's cryptocurrencies are the talk of the town, and of course, there's 5G and all sorts of AI and Internet of Things. Has the Russian cyber operation, these attacks, has the nature of these attacks changed over the last few years of your research?
Absolutely. They are changing and they are amending, but it also depends on the target, right? If we think about sort of what we have in Ukraine or Georgia or other post-Soviet Union countries, the attacks are not as sophisticated as they are, for instance, against the US or any Western countries. And the reason they are not as sophisticated because the targets are not as sophisticated. So if we think even about the evolution of cyber attacks in Ukraine, they were very sort of, I wouldn't call them primitive, but they didn't require a lot of sort of expertise and time to prepare, because in 2014, Ukraine wasn't ready for any cyber operations. Also, Ukraine rely on Russia's infrastructure. So Russia didn't have to invest a lot of time and money to do something to disrupt the services. But if we think about Russian attacks against the US critical infrastructure, or even the Russian interference into the US elections, the campaigns are much more sophisticated because the target is, and also the defenses of the target are. So I would say everybody is catching up, but also Russia in particular, they're very flexible in how they come up with a particular operation depending on the specifics of the target, which is a very smart move.
Nadia, but you know, the commentators and the researchers and the cybersecurity community were all talking over the past few weeks about a full-scale cyber war, and Russia really flexing its cyber military and cyber warfare muscle, so to speak, to actually launch a full-scale war. Is it already here? Is it coming? What do you think the Russians are planning next, or is it all entirely offline now? And this was just a little more, well, a precursor to the real war, which is now being fought on the battlefield? Or will this continue the cyber warfare or the hybrid warfare, so to speak?
So I disagree with that point of view. And I think the reason for it is very obvious. Russia has been using cyber operations against Ukraine since 2014. And the reason Russia needed to place the troops, and now Russia use full-blown invasion in Ukraine, is because cyber attacks are not effective. Cyber attacks didn't allow Russia to achieve its strategic objectives. So that's why I needed to use cyber force. But also, if we analyze and look at the cyber operations that have been done since the start of the conflict, or even since the time when Russia put the troops on the Ukrainian border, they were not very effective. We had some distributed denial of service attacks against the Ukrainian government websites. Again, they disrupted some work of these websites for a few hours, but then the services were quickly restored. I think the most important part of the sort of cyber front that we have seen so far is the disinformation influence operations that Russia has put over the last 2 weeks. And we can see how important this aspect of the Russian campaign is from its recent law that the Russian government implemented against the so-called the spread of fake news by media, and as a result of which any media sources that promotes any narrative that is different from the one of the Russia's Ministry of Defense could have up to 15 years of jail time. I think that is the key, and that is the main sort of place where Russia puts its efforts in cyberspace.
And you know, also, Nadia, in terms of the Ukrainian people, we've seen this throughout our coverage here on India Today. There's that spirit of resilience, and you'd understand it really well in terms of how the Ukrainians have fought back. It also translates in the digital world because the Ukrainians haven't taken all of this lying down. I know the IT army, which they've come up with, is this sort of cyber resistance force. Also, we've seen hacking collectives coming up as well. They've come up as countermeasures to some of these actions by the Russians. So Ukrainians aren't taking this lying down, right? They're fighting back quite effectively online as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of resistance from the sort of Ukrainians that are part of the government institutions. We know that the US and the UK cyber warfare teams are helping them. And I was mildly sort of surprised and impressed of how resilient the Ukrainian cyber defenses are. Again, comparing with 2014, when the conflict had started. But also there is a lot of support from the various hacking groups from the Ukrainian diaspora, but also not only Ukrainians. And we've heard about various cyber operations against various government and non-government facilities in Russia. The only problem with these non-state attacks, the attacks by the hacking group, is that it's very hard in the cyberspace sort of to differentiate whether it's a non-state hacking group that is doing it or whether it's a government. And so some experts say that if it's not possible to distinguish, the Russia can take that the government, particularly Western governments, are sponsoring some of these attacks. And the result, it can escalate and hack back some of the Western nations.
Nadia, we cover technology here on Tech Today, and this is obviously a very complex situation, but you have family in Ukraine as well, and in the connected world that we live in, we all want to stay in touch with family. I've heard from some of my friends in Ukraine and in the region that a lot of them have left Telegram, the messaging app, and they're using Signal and other end-to-end encrypted platforms. Has that been an issue? And do you think that a lot of locals and residents in the area, in and around where you come from, a lot of them have been using other forms of social media to actually crowdsource things and actually help out? Because I have friends even over here in India who are using social media quite effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. They are using various sort of communication depending on their technological level. So, for instance, my grandma, obviously, she hasn't switched any of her routine. We are using Viber for communication, and luckily, there hasn't been any internet shutdowns or anything like that, or mobile telecommunications shutdown. So, I've been easily communicating with her. But also some of my sort of, I would say, younger friends and family members, they're using various modes of communications depending on the level of security that they care for, right? So they can use some of the encrypted messages, as you mentioned, WhatsApp and Signal. Some of them, they continue relying on social media, such as Facebook. Some of them continue using email.
Nadia, thanks so much for sharing all those inputs and insights. We hope your family stays safe and everyone stays safe from this war being fought not only offline, but also online. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, that's about all the time we have on this show. You can always visit the Tech Today page on our website. And of course, you can always check us out on YouTube for all the latest from the world of technology. In the coming days, we can only hope that the situation in Ukraine gets better offline on the battlefield and online as well. Stay safe. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.